I had been sent to Blackwind Ridge as a company scribe, my ledger filled with neat columns of ore tallies and hazard reports, and my pockets padded by a modest advance from the Silvervein Combine. When I first arrived, boots crunching on frost-slick scree, I believed the worst I might face would be a cave-in or a sulphur cough. I certainly did not believe in basalt ravens, much less in runes scratched across the open air itself. Those were campfire fancies. Convenient excuses seasoned drill captains offered the green hands to keep them humble. Yet 3 months after my posting began, the ravens tore any skepticism from me as cleanly as a pickaxe splits shale. And when the mountain finally pulsed, when its slow subterranean heartbeat quickened into a violent, deafening drum, I understood that the avian phantoms had not been spun from ale-brewed nightmare. They were stone-feathered custodians of a secret too vast for the Combine's ledgers, and their saga, once dismissed as superstition, became my only compass in a night of ashes and flame. I will tell it as it unfolded to me, for much of the record has already been buried beneath obsidian slag and rumour. 1. The ravens appeared first at dusk, silhouettes against a bleeding sky. I was on tally duty, perched atop Crane Platform B, noting each crate of argent ore hauled toward the furnaces below. Miners shouted beneath me, their voices bouncing off iron struts when a dour hush swept the yard. Hard men who could swing a 12-pound hammer all day with wrists steady as granite suddenly stood, slack-jawed, eyes tracking something above the northern ridge. I turned, just in time to see 6 black shapes gliding over the scarlet sun. They were larger than eagles, yet moved with the crisp coordination of starlings in murmuration. Against the light, their wings looked ragged, but when one banked lower, I caught the dull glimmer of rock rather than feather. Basalt, the same volcanic stone that made the ridge's slopes. The ravens did not flap. They coasted on currents that shouldn't have existed, as though the mountain's heat exhaled a private wind for them alone. Then the leading bird tilted its beak toward the firmament and began to scratch. There was no surface to scratch, no sky-hung slate. Nonetheless, sparks leapt from the contact point, bright as steel on flint. The air itself rippled, and glowing gouges remained where the beak had passed. Lines intersected, curved and stitched back upon themselves, until a sigil larger than the moon hovered above the camp. Something like a spiral cut by a diagonal stroke, bracketed with 3 dots. Every man and woman on the yard stared as an unspoken dread worked into our bones. Though nobody understood the meaning, everyone felt the shape carried weight. The ravens finished their work, circled the rune once, and flew westward, vanishing into the red horizon. The rune lingered into full darkness, smouldering as though etched on invisible coal. Finally it dimmed to embers and guttered out, leaving only the mountain silhouette and the silence of miners who suddenly wished they were far from Blackwing Ridge. Foreman Brackley, square-jawed, silver-haired with a scar that glinted like quartz, broke the quiet first. "Back to work," he barked. "Light the braziers." But production slowed that evening. In the mess hall, talk of the basalt ravens thickened the steam of barley stew. Some swore this was not their first visit, perhaps the 6th or 7th this year. They came whenever the mountains stirred, though no one could quantify what that meant. A tremor here, a vent of hot goss there. Miners who had laboured under dozens of peaks claimed only the ridge carried a heartbeat, a thrum felt in the soles, faint but steady like distant drums. Old Lyra, our explosives mistress, kept a private ledger of portents. She had sketched plenty of the raven's sky runes in her notebook, charcoal lines smeared by calloused thumbs. "Each time it's a different mark," she told me, tapping the latest sketch. "Yet they all rhyme. See how the dots orbit? Like ticks of a clock. They're counting off." "Counting to what?" I asked. Lyra just blew smoke from her roll leaf and muttered, "To the moment we meet what's beating under our boots." I wrote it down as an anecdote. The Combine liked colourful details for their quarterly bulletins, anything to dazzle investors. But a worm of unease gnawed at me. and I spent that night listening for a pulse in the mountain. I heard only wind. 2. A fortnight later, a seismic shudder roused the bunkhouses before dawn. Mugs rattled from bedside crates. Rafters squealed. When we dashed outside, steam was venting from fissures that had not existed the previous evening, hissing jets that tasted of metal and rotten fruit. Brackley called a safety muster, yet before he could finish roll call, the ravens returned. There were 9 this time, their bodies dark as midnight ore. Instead of carving a single emblem, they collaborated on a tapestry of symbols. Lines, spirals, wedges, connected by luminous filaments. It looked to me like a map's cross-section, as though displaying the inner coils of the ridge. Chambers, tunnels, galleries. One symbol repeated at the deepest point. A stylized heart encaged by triangles. With each stroke, that heart blazed brighter crimson. "The mountain pulse," Lyra whispered beside me. "They're showing its chamber." A miner named Kuhn spat. "Showin' or summonin' could be their cursin' us, not warnin' us." Foreman Brackley chewed his lip. "Safety protocols demanded we halt digging until company geologists reviewed the tremor data, but the Combine tolerated no delays. Our quota was weeks behind after early winter blizzards." Brackley announced a temporary suspension only in the upper-level shafts. The deep vein crews would keep drilling, double shifts if necessary to catch up. Later, in the admin trailer, I penned a memo suggesting we import a rune scholar from the capital. A foreman with no patience for folk nonsense rejected the expense. My request found the wastebasket. That night, a rhythmic hum issued from the ridge. It was too low for ears, more felt than heard, like a tremble in teeth, a resonance in marrow. I tried to distract myself, reading about the ancient granite houses of the hill kingdoms, but each paragraph quivered on the page until letters blurred into serpents coiling round a mute red heart. I finally slept against the desk and dreamed of ravens plucking glowing worms from my chest. 3 weeks passed. Production soared, as did tensions. We pulled silver in record tonnage, yet accidents multiplied. Misfires in the blasting lines, methane pockets igniting with sick blue flames, ore carts derailing on tracks that warped overnight. Every mishap was preceded, witnesses said, by a sudden shadow crossing their lanterns. No bird in sight, just a fleeting blot that chilled the air. I catalogued each incident, and still the Combine's replies were brief. Continue operations. Maximum output required before spring melt. On the first new moon of high frost, we drilled into a cavern neither survey maps nor echo soundings predicted. Crew Chief Desmond and 7 miners were swallowed when the floor collapsed beneath their rig. Rescue teams descended lines into a chamber lit by bioluminescent fungi, slick stalagmites, and a lake that steamed in the cold air. Desmond's men were found near the shore, bones charred, flesh unmarked, as though heat had boiled them from inside. At the center of the lake, pulsing faintly like a giant ember, floated a boulder the size of a cottage. Obsidian shot through with veins of argentite. It emitted the same low hum I had felt in my teeth. The ravens gathered by dozens at the cavern mouth. Their basalt feathers shone in lantern light, revealing striations like cooled lava flow. They did not attack or flee, merely observed, heads cocked. One stroked its beak in a slow, deliberate arc near the vapor above the lake, leaving a rune that matched the heart symbol of earlier warnings. The company ordered the cavern cordoned off and sealed. Geologists argued the stone within must be an exceptionally pure ore node, electrified by piezo energy. The Combine wired back a single instruction. Extract and ship. Gear was lowered. Winches, diamond saws, crucibles. I watched from the lip of the shaft as the ravens flapped up the ventilation ducts and into the night. By dawn, their runes filled the sky above every ridge. Hearts within triangles, throbbing so bright even the lanterns felt pale. Snowfall hissed where it touched the glowing sigils, evaporating mid-air. Foreman Brackley refused to halt. That rock is profit, Profit keeps your families fed, but miners muttered about widow fees paid in advance. Some fled down the mule trails during night shifts, no wages worth the risk. The foreman posted armed guards to keep the rest from deserting. I wrote a frantic letter of resignation, though I doubted the mail sled would arrive before the mountain decided our fates. I woke to alarms and sulphur stench on the fourth night after the cavern's discovery. The boulder had been winched halfway to the surface when it split, disgorging molten light. The pulse previously felt as vibration now thudded audibly, like drums of war. Miners staggered through corridors, ears bleeding. Brackley shouted evacuation orders too late. Tunnels buckled, timbers snapped, and the mountain began to inhale. I fled with Lyra and a handful of others along the south adit, lighting the way with her blast stone lantern. Behind us, slag carts toppled as the floor heaved. In the glow we saw ravens lining the catwalks, wings folded. They seemed neither panicked nor hostile, only resolute, as guardians at a vigil. "What do they want?" Lyra gasped, wiping blood from her ear. "To save us," I ventured, though doubt licked my tongue. "Or to witness." At the exit, we emerged into a snowstorm turned crimson by the sky runes. But these were no longer static glyphs. They spun, intersected, and spiraled inward toward a point directly above the mine. The revolution accelerated until the runes became a vortex of molten script. Ravens circled the maelstrom, adding strokes that stitched the air like living needles weaving firecloth. Across the yard, I saw Brackley dragging cope lanterns onto the loading platform, trying to organize a final haul. A metallic shriek split the night as the hoist tower sheared in two, dropping the cracked boulder remnants into the works yard. Argentite splashed out like liquid mercury. From that silver spate rose a column of blinding light, and within it coalesced an immense form. The mountain pulse made flesh. Imagine a heart of slag and crystal, ventricle walls of black glass, valves the size of mill wheels. Beating in the open air, lava pumped through its arteries, spraying arcs that cooled into basalt feathers mid-flight, feathers that fused onto the ravens who flew too close, making them whole anew. The ravens were, I realized, shards of the pulse's own body. Scouts, shed and reclaimed as needed. Each throb of the great heart ruptured the ground, and geysers of steam jetted skyward. The vortex of runes shrank to encircle the heart. Like a cage of light, Jira gripped my sleeve, eyes wide. "They're binding it." Indeed, the ravens began striking the glyph cage, hammering runes into tighter loops. A harsh melody accompanied them, stone on stone, punctuation forged of sparks. But for every rune struck, the heart throbbed harder. Edges cracking cages. Lava rained. Screams knifed the wind miners caught in silver fire or buried in rockfall. I saw Foreman Brackley below the tower stump. He had fetched a blasting plunger and wired charges around the heart's base. His eyes glinted with iron will, or perhaps madness, propagating replaced by the last instinct to wrest control. "Back!" he roared at anyone in range. "Blow it shut!" I realized he meant to drop the pulse back into the mine to plug the wound. But as he depressed the plunger, a raven dove, severing the wires with its beak of obsidian. Before the spark could travel, the heart pulsed. Brighter yet. Brackley's face contorted. He snatched a fallen pick and swung at the raven. Basalt feathers deflected the blow with a metallic clang. The raven's eyes glowed solar white. With one swipe, it etched a single rune on Brackley's breast. The foreman staggered, clutched the mark, and crumbled into ash that scattered on the next heartbeat gust. I understood then the ravens were not malevolent, but they served the pulse above all else. Anyone threatening to bind or break it would be unmade. The yard pitched. A crack opened beneath supply sheds, revealing the cavern lake far below. Steam exhaled, carrying the stench of minerals and ancient rot. The heart hovered over the gap, pumping magma into the abyss, forging new rock even as old strata shattered. 5 wee survivors clung to the edge of a coal bin, the heat flaying skin through coats. Lyra shouted into my ear, "Help them carve." What? The runes, they're warnings, patterns. Complete the cage or the pulse will burst free. But Brackley tried to bind it. He tried to bury it. There's a difference. The ravens aren't killing the pulse, only taming its vent so the mountain lives. We must give it form. It struck me that the ravens alone were too few for such a colossal glyph net. They needed hands that understood angles and stress, like miners who set support arches. Lyra thrust her charcoal notebook at me. Within were dozens of rune sketches, plus how they echoed load-bearing truss designs. She had been studying their alphabet longer than she admitted. A blast of molten wind charred the notebook's cover, but I held firm. "Tell me where." We scrambled across the yard, gathering whoever could still stand. Cone, with burnt arms wrapped in rag, Millie the saw operator, 2 junior clerks, a cook. Under Lyra's terse commands, we righted broken gantry frames into geometric positions, aligning them with angles she read from the sketches. Whenever we completed a segment, ravens swooped to touch their beaks against the metal, fusing lines of glowing script onto the structure. The grid gradually extended, a spider web of sigils anchored to cranes, drill towers and ore chutes. The heartbeats grew erratic. Each spasm hurled shards that peppered the yard like fiery hail. One tore through Millie's shoulder, but she kept bolting trusses, teeth clenched against the pain. My lungs felt blistered with every breath, yet the pattern unfolded under our bleeding hands. At last, the final girder screeched into place. A raven larger than any prior wingspan, longer than a cart, landed atop the beam next to me. Its weight dented the steel. With a deliberate motion, it carved the binding sigil. 3 orbiting dots around the heart glyph, capped by the diagonal stroke. The mountain exhaled as if in relief. The heart shuddered and eased downward, threads of light leashing it to the web we had woven. No longer a wild thing, it nestled into the chasm, a furnace sealed by runic lattice. Lava seeped into ordered channels instead of spurting chaos. The ground stopped buckling. The air cooled from blast furnace to forge warm. We collapsed among smoking rubble. Snowflakes drifted, unburned for the first time since dusk. The ravens perched on beams, silent save for the occasional clink of stone feathers settling. The rune vortex above dissolved into gentle swirls of aurora, green and violet ribbons dancing across midnight. 6 dawn revealed the mine a ruin. The main shaft was gone, the yard a slag field, yet the ridge still stood, its peak capped by fresh obsidian spires that shimmered like black glass castles. The pulse beat below, muffled but steady, a breath contained. Only 29 souls survived from over 200. We gathered around what remained of the mess hall, its potbelly stove, miraculously intact, and spoke little. The ravens stayed nearby, perched on girder nests, their basalt bodies steaming in the morning chill. Corn finally coughed and asked the questions snarled in every throat. "Now what?" Lyra's answer surprised even her, I think. "We become wardens. The Combine will send new crews, greedy or blind. If we don't keep this lattice maintained, the pulse will rupture again, and next time there may be no ravens left to help." I looked at the birds, noticing fissures along many of their wings, signs of wounds suffered forging the cage. They would regenerate, but slowly. Stone heals on geological time. "Do you think the Combine will listen?" I asked. "They'll listen to quarantine protocols and hazard fines," Lyra said with a grim grin. "Or they'll lose more men than ore is worth. Either way, we stay." So we set to work. We salvaged supplies, patched beams, and chiseled warning stellae at every path to the ridge, each bearing the heart glyph bracketed by the triple dots. A caution to all that a living furnace slept inside the mountain, bound by kindness, skill, and no small measure of sacrifice. The ravens assisted at dusk, flying arcs across the sky to reinscribe fading runes, refreshing the lattice. Sometimes they perched near our forge fires, watching sparks leap like hatchlings. I began sketching them in my new ledger, not as curiosities, but companions. Epilogue. Spring melt arrived, and with it a combine envoy, 2 engineers, an accountant, and 6 armed guards. Their faces paled at the cratered valley, the glimmering cage web, the basalt silhouettes dotting every beam. Lyra and I met them at the boundary stone beneath a rune arch burning soft amber. The accountant brandished papers. "We're here to appraise damages and resume operations." I handed him my surviving reports, plus a tome of raven runes and engineering diagrams demonstrating the lattice's function. He leafed through, tugging at his collar as though his shirt had become too tight. "You're telling me the mountain has a heart?" he said skeptically. "It has a pulse," Lyra corrected, "and these ravens are its emissaries. Mine here again, and you mine the heart itself. We barely survived the last whisper of its anger." The envoy eyed the nearest raven, which ruffled its stony feathers with a sound like grinding millstones. A single ember winked in its eye. The accountant swallowed. "Suppose we relocate extraction toward the eastern face." "Phil." I guided his gloved hand to a length of rail embedded in the lattice. A faint vibration coursed through, steady, powerful. "That's its heartbeat. Wherever you dig into it. Respect the pulse, or it will stop you." He drew his hand away, gaze distant. "What are you proposing?" "A sanctuary," I replied. "Protect the ridge. Study. Don't exploit. The silver veins can remain untapped. Let the ravens fly and the pulse breathe. In exchange, no more men die, and you earn favor of a power older than prophets." It was not an easy negotiation, nor final even now. Yet as I finish this chronicle in the watchtower overlooking the lattice, I see the envoy's tents pitched respectfully outside the rune boundary. They consult, calculate, and send messages back to the capital. The ravens wheel overhead, carving gentle sigils of patience across morning clouds. Lyra believes the pulse dreamed those birds into being so that it might speak. I believe they and it are one. Whatever the truth, we miners, former miners, now wardens, have learned to read the runes in the sky, and when the basalt ravens carve new warnings, we listen. For mountains are not merely stone, they are stories beating deep in the earth. And sometimes, if you cut too greedily, the story rises, hard-bared, to remind you whose saga truly endures.